The buzzards circled overhead, black silhouettes against the merciless Arizona sky, as Grace Harrington's cracked lips parted in a desperate prayer for death. 3 days in the desert had burned away everything but her will to survive, and even that was fading fast. Her once fine traveling dress was torn and filthy, her fair skin blistered red from the relentless sun of July 1873, and the small canteen that had kept her alive lay empty beside her outstretched hand. Samuel Dawson spotted the circling birds from 2 miles away. The experienced cowboy knew what they meant: death was coming, if it hadn't arrived already. He adjusted his hat to better shield his eyes from the glare and urged his dun stallion forward across the unforgiving landscape. As trail boss for the Double Cross Ranch, he'd seen his share of the desert's victims, but something made him spur his horse faster toward this particular gathering of scavengers. When he crested the small rise and saw her lying there, half buried in sand, her golden hair splayed out like a halo, his heart clenched. From a distance he thought he was too late, but as he approached, he saw the slight rise and fall of her chest. "Hold on there," he called, though she showed no sign of hearing him. Samuel dismounted in a swift motion, reaching for his canteen. Kneeling beside her, he gently lifted her head, noting the ugly bruise at her temple. "Miss, can you hear me?" Grace felt something cool against her lips and instinctively opened her mouth. Water-blessed water trickled down her parched throat. She coughed, her eyes fluttering open to see a man's face hovering above hers, backlit by the blinding sun. For a moment, she thought she was hallucinating. "Easy now," the man said, his voice deep and reassuring. "Just small sips." She tried to speak but could only manage a raspy sound. He shushed her gently. "Don't try to talk yet. Let's get you out of this sun first." With surprising gentleness for his large frame, he gathered her into his arms and carried her to where his horse waited patiently. Grace felt herself being placed on the saddle, the man mounting behind her, one strong arm securing her against his chest as they began to move. The steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the blessed shade of the man's body behind her lulled her back into unconsciousness. When Grace next opened her eyes, she was lying on a bed in a small, neat cabin. A cool cloth rested on her forehead, and her skin felt different. Someone had applied a soothing salve to her sunburns. She tried to sit up but fell back with a groan. "Whoa there," came that same deep voice. The cowboy from the desert appeared at her bedside, holding a cup of water. "You're safe now, but you need to rest." "Where am I?" she managed to ask, her voice still rough. "My place," he said, helping her take a sip of water. "Line shack for the Double Cross Ranch, named Samuel Dawson, but most folks call me Sam." "Grace," she whispered. "Grace Harrington." "Well, Miss Harrington, you're lucky to be alive. Another few hours out there." He didn't finish the thought. "Can you tell me what happened? How'd you end up alone in the desert?" Grace closed her eyes, the memories flooding back. The stagecoach, the holdup, the passengers being forced out into the desert, the shot that had grazed her head when she tried to keep her mother's locket. "Stagecoach robbery," she said, her voice stronger now. "3 men. They took everything. I tried to save my mother's locket and one of them hit me with his gun. I must have been unconscious when they left. When I woke up, the stage was gone. Everyone was gone." Sam's jaw tightened. "Probably the Sutter gang. They've been hitting stages between Tucson and Phoenix." "The other passengers?" Grace asked, trying again to sit up. Sam helped her, adjusting pillows behind her back. "Can't say. If they were left afoot in the desert too, they either found help or—" He trailed off, not wanting to upset her. "Or the Buzzards found them first," Grace finished grimly. Sam nodded, impressed by her fortitude. "I'll ride out tomorrow, see if I can find any sign of them. For now, you need to rest and recover. I can't impose on you like this." "It's no imposition, Miss Harrington. I couldn't very well leave you out there, and you're in no condition to travel yet." Grace studied him properly for the first time. Samuel Dawson was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm gray with hints of blue. His dark hair curled slightly where it peeked out from beneath his hat, and his face, though weathered from years in the sun, was handsome in a rugged way. She guessed him to be in his early 30s. "Thank you," she said simply, "for saving my life." He nodded, a slight smile softening his features. "Anyone would have done the same. But it wasn't anyone, it was you." Their eyes met for a long moment before Sam cleared his throat and stood. "You should try to eat something. I've got some stew on the stove. Nothing fancy, but it'll put some strength back in you." While Sam busied himself with the food, Grace took stock of her situation. She was stranded in a remote cabin with a man she didn't know, her possessions stolen, her planned journey to Bentonville, Arkansas, derailed completely. She had been traveling to take up a position as a schoolteacher. A fresh start after the death of her parents had left her alone in the world. Now she had nothing but the torn, dirty dress she wore. Sam returned with a bowl of stew and helped her eat when her hands proved too shaky to manage on her own. The simple act of being fed by this kind stranger brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, embarrassed. "For what?" he asked, his voice gentle. "For being such a burden. For crying over stew of all things." Sam set the bowl aside and looked at her directly. "Miss Harrington, you've survived something that would have killed most folks. You're entitled to a few tears." The simple understanding in his words opened the floodgates, and suddenly Grace was sobbing, the trauma of the past days overwhelming her. Without hesitation, Sam gathered her against his chest, his hand awkwardly patting her back as she cried herself out. "I'm alone," she finally whispered against his shirt. "Completely alone in the world, and now I have nothing left." "You're not alone right now," he said softly. "And you have your life, which is no small thing." Grace pulled back, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "You're right, of course. I just don't know what I'll do now. First things first, you need to heal up, then we'll figure out the rest. I've sent word to the main ranch house. My boss, Mr. Thornton, is a fair man. Once he hears what happened, I'm sure he'll help." For the next 2 days, Grace drifted in and out of sleep, her body recovering from its ordeal. Sam proved to be an attentive caretaker, changing the cloths on her forehead, applying more salve to her burns, and coaxing her to eat and drink. He spoke little of himself, but through his actions, Grace began to form a picture of a man who lived by a strong moral code, one that included rescuing strangers from certain death and caring for them after. On the 3rd morning, Grace awoke feeling significantly stronger. She managed to sit up on her own and was attempting to stand when Sam entered the cabin with fresh water. "Whoa there," he said, rushing to her side. "You sure you're ready for that?" "I need to start regaining my strength," she insisted. "And I feel much better today." He studied her face, noting the improved color and the clarity in her green eyes. "All right, but let me help you." With Sam's arm supporting her, Grace took her first tentative steps around the cabin. It was a simple place, one room with a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and a few shelves holding books, which surprised her. "You like to read?" she asked, gesturing to the small collection. Sam looked almost embarrassed. "When there's time. Winters get long out here. May I?" When he nodded, she examined the titles. Several were practical guides to ranching and animal husbandry, but there were also volumes of poetry by Tennyson and Whitman, and well-worn copies of novels by Dickens and Twain. "You have excellent taste, Mr. Dawson." "Sam," he corrected. "And they're just stories to pass the time." "They're more than that," Grace said, running her fingers along the spine of a volume. "They're windows to other worlds." "Sounds like something a teacher would say," he observed. Grace looked up in surprise. "How did you know I'm a teacher?" "You mentioned heading to Bentonville for a teaching position when you were delirious with fever that first night." Grace vaguely remembered rambling in her half-conscious state and wondered what else she might have revealed. "I was a school teacher back in Boston," she confirmed. "After my parents died last winter, there wasn't much keeping me there. When I saw the advertisement for a position in Bentonville, it seemed like a sign of a fresh start." "And now?" Sam asked quietly. Grace sighed. "Now, I don't know. The school term starts in 3 weeks. Even if I could find a way to get there, all my belongings, my teaching materials, my letter of introduction, everything was in my trunk on that stagecoach." "We'll find a way," Sam said with such certainty that Grace found herself believing him. Later that afternoon, the sound of approaching horses roused them both. Sam checked out the window, then relaxed. "It's Mr. Thornton and the ranch doctor." Grace smoothed her hair self-consciously, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance as the cabin door opened to admit 2 men. The first was older, with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard, dressed in the practical but fine clothes of a successful rancher. The second was younger, carrying a medical bag. "Miss Harrington," the older man said, removing his hat. "George Thornton, owner of the Double Cross. This is Dr. William Porter. Sam here tells me you've had quite an ordeal." Grace nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the presence of more people after days alone with Sam. "If you'll permit me, miss," the doctor said, "I'd like to examine you." "Of course." Sam and Mr. Thornton stepped outside to give them privacy, and Grace could hear their low voices in discussion as Dr. Porter checked her injuries. "You're healing well," he pronounced finally. "That head injury could have been much worse, but there doesn't appear to be any lasting damage. The dehydration and exposure were your biggest dangers, but Sam did right by you with his care." "He saved my life," Grace said simply. The doctor nodded. "That he did. Now, you'll need to take it easy for another week at least, but I see no reason why you shouldn't make a full recovery." When the men returned inside, the doctor relayed his findings. Mr. Thornton nodded thoughtfully. "Miss Harrington, Sam has explained your situation. I've sent some of my men to search for any sign of the other passengers or your belongings, though I fear the Sutter gang will have taken anything of value far from here by now." "That's very kind of you, sir. In the meantime, I'd like to extend an invitation for you to stay at the main house once you're well enough to travel. My wife would welcome the company, and it would be more comfortable for you than this bachelor's quarters." "I couldn't impose nonsense," Mr. Thornton waved away her protest. "It's the least we can do, and perhaps we can help you figure out your next steps." Grace glanced at Sam, who had been unusually quiet. His expression was unreadable. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton. I accept your kind offer." After the 2 men departed, promising to return in a few days if Grace was strong enough for the journey to the main house, an awkward silence fell over the cabin. "Your boss seems like a good man," Grace finally said. "The best," Sam agreed. "Been with him for 8 years now. Started as a regular ranch hand and worked my way up to trail boss." "You don't sound happy about me going to the main house," Grace observed. Sam looked up, surprised at her perception. "It's not that. It's the right thing for you, proper accommodations, a lady's company. It's just..." "Just what?" "I've gotten used to having you here," he admitted, then quickly added, "but Mr. Thornton is right. This isn't a suitable place for a lady like yourself." Grace felt a strange flutter in her chest at his words. "I've rather enjoyed your company too, Sam." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Grace saw something in his gaze that made her heart beat faster. Then he cleared his throat and turned away to tend the fire. "We should get you some proper clothes before you head to the main house," he said, changing the subject. "There's a widow about your size who helps out at the ranch sometimes. I'll ride over tomorrow and see if she can spare a dress or two." "You've done so much for me already," Sam shrugged. "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing to Grace. In a world that had recently shown her its cruelest face, Samuel Dawson had appeared like an angel of mercy. As she watched him move about the cabin, his movements efficient and purposeful, she realized she was seeing him with new eyes, not just as her rescuer, but as a man. A good man. And an undeniably attractive one at that. The next day, Sam returned with 2 simple but clean dresses, a pair of boots that were only slightly too large, and a hairbrush. The items were humble, but to Grace, they were treasures beyond price. "Mrs. Miller sends these with her compliments," Sam said, looking slightly uncomfortable as he handed over the bundle of women's clothing. "She says you're welcome to keep them. Please convey my deepest thanks when you next see her," Grace said, fighting back tears at the simple kindness. Sam nodded, then hesitated. "There's a small stream about 50 yards behind the cabin, private enough if you'd like to freshen up. I can heat some water for you." Grace flushed at the thought of a proper wash after days of makeshift cleanliness. That would be wonderful. An hour later, with her hair washed and her body clothed in clean garments, Grace felt more human than she had since the stagecoach robbery. She'd managed the whole process herself, though it had tired her more than she wanted to admit. When she returned to the cabin, Sam's appreciative glance made her cheeks warm. "You look better," he said, clearly searching for a word that wouldn't be too forward. "I feel better. Thank you." That evening, as they shared a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee, Grace found herself studying Sam when he wasn't looking. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness that made her feel safe despite all she'd been through. When their conversation lulled into comfortable silence, she found herself unwilling to retire for the night, knowing her time in his company was growing short. "Tell me about your life before the double cross," she said impulsively. Sam looked up, surprised. "Not much to tell. Grew up on a small farm in Missouri. Parents died of influenza when I was 16. Drifted west, worked cattle drives, broke horses, did whatever work I could find until I landed here. No wife, family," he shook his head. "Never found the time or the right person, I suppose." "A handsome man like you." The words slipped out before Grace could stop them. In the lamplight, she could see color rise to Sam's cheeks. "Most women don't fancy a man who spends more time with cattle than people," he said, deflecting the compliment. "I think those women might be missing something important," Grace said softly. Their eyes met across the table, and this time, neither looked away. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had formed in these strange, intense days. "Grace," Sam began, his voice lower than usual, but a sudden pounding at the door interrupted whatever he had been about to say. He rose quickly, hand moving instinctively to the pistol at his hip as he approached the door. "Who's there?" "It's Jake Matthews, boss. Got news." Sam opened the door to admit a young cowboy, barely out of his teens, who removed his hat upon seeing Grace. "Begging your pardon, madam," he said, nodding respectfully before turning back to Sam. "We found 2 of the other passengers from the stage, Mr. Dawson. Alive. An old man and his grandson. They managed to make it to a water hole and were found by a passing freighter who brought them to Copper Springs. Mr. Thornton sent me to tell you right away." "And the others?" Grace asked, hope rising in her chest. Jake's expression fell. "No sign of them yet, madam. But the old man said there were only 5 passengers total, counting himself and the boy. Said the other woman and her husband headed north, following the stage tracks. Any word on Miss Harrington's belongings?" Sam asked. Jake shook his head. The Sutter gang took everything of value. The law's been notified, but they'll be long gone, Sam finished grimly. After Jake departed with a promise to return in 3 days to escort Grace to the main ranch house if she was well enough, she sat heavily in her chair, emotions warring within her. Relief that some had survived mingled with grief for those still missing and despair at the confirmation that all her possessions were truly gone. "I'm glad some survived," she said finally. "Me too," Sam agreed, sitting across from her again. "And we'll keep looking for the others." Grace nodded, suddenly exhausted. The excitement and emotion had drained what little energy she had regained. Sam noticed immediately. "You should rest," he said gently. As he helped her to the bed, his hand accidentally brushed against hers, sending an unexpected shiver through her body. She looked up to find his face unexpectedly close, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her. For a moment, she wanted him to. Instead, he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Good night, Miss Harrington," he said formally. "Good night, Sam," she replied, unable to keep the hint of disappointment from her voice. As she drifted toward sleep, Grace found herself wondering what might have happened if Jake Matthews hadn't arrived when he did. And for the first time since the robbery, her dreams were not of desert heat and circling buzzards, but of storm-gray eyes and gentle hands. The next 2 days passed in a strange limbo. Grace grew stronger, able to move around the cabin freely and even venture outside for short periods. Sam continued his duties as trail boss, but arranged to stay close enough to check on her regularly. Their conversations flowed more easily now, covering everything from books they'd read to their hopes and disappointments. Grace learned that beneath Sam's quiet exterior lay a thoughtful mind and a dry wit that often surprised a laugh from her. She told him about her childhood in Boston, her passion for teaching, and her dreams of making a difference in the lives of children. "You still can," Sam said when she expressed doubt about her future. "Bentonville isn't the only place that needs good teachers." "Are you suggesting I stay in Arizona territory?" Grace asked, trying to keep her tone light despite the way her heart quickened at the thought. Sam looked away, focusing on the mending in his hands one of her torn stockings that he had offered to repair with surprising skill. "Plenty of growing towns around here. Copper Springs is getting big enough for a proper school. Even the Double Cross has enough children now to need someone educated." "Is that so?" Grace watched his expression carefully. "Mr. Thornton's grandchildren visit every summer, and there are 4 families working the ranch with young ones. They're getting their letters from Mrs. Thornton right now, but she's not getting any younger." "And would there be a place for a teacher to live on this ranch?" Sam's hands stilled on his mending. "I reckon arrangements could be made." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Grace took a step toward him, emboldened by something in his expression. "Sam," the sound of approaching horses broke the moment. Sam rose quickly, looking out the window. "It's Mr. Thornton again, with Mrs. Thornton this time." Grace smoothed her borrowed dress, wishing suddenly that she had something finer to wear to meet the rancher's wife. Elizabeth Thornton proved to be a handsome woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a practical manner that immediately put Grace at ease. After inquiring about her health, Mrs. Thornton got straight to the point. "My dear, I've come to invite you to stay with us until you decide what you wish to do next. George has told me of your unfortunate circumstances, and I simply cannot bear the thought of you having to face such challenges alone. You're very kind, Mrs. Thornton. Please, call me Elizabeth. And it's not kindness, merely decent Christian charity. Besides, I confess to selfish motives as well. Female company is a rare commodity at the Double Cross. Grace glanced at Sam, who was engaged in conversation with Mr. Thornton on the other side of the cabin. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, their eyes meeting briefly before both looked away. "I would be honored to accept your hospitality," Grace said, turning back to Mrs. Thornton. "Mr. Dawson has been most kind, but I'm sure he'll be glad to have his cabin back." "I'm not so sure about that," Mrs. Thornton said quietly, following Grace's earlier glance with a knowing smile. "But it would be more proper, and we can help you plan your next steps." It was decided that Grace would travel to the main house the following day. As the Thorntons prepared to depart, Mrs. Thornton pressed a package into Grace's hands. "Some proper toiletries and a nightgown," she explained. "And a book to pass the time. I thought you might enjoy it." "Thank you," Grace said, genuinely touched by the woman's thoughtfulness. After they left, an awkward silence fell over the cabin. Sam busied himself with chores while Grace opened the package from Mrs. Thornton. The promised nightgown was simple but made of soft cotton, and the toiletries a small cake of lavender soap, a pot of cream for her still tender skin, and a small vial of rose water were luxuries she hadn't expected to see again so soon. The book was a romance novel, popular back east, but one Grace hadn't had a chance to read. "Mrs. Thornton seems lovely," Grace said, breaking the silence. "She is," Sam agreed. "Been like a mother to half the ranch hands, myself included. Lost her only daughter to fever years back." "That explains her kindness to a stranger." Sam looked up from the fire he was stoking. "It's not just that. You're easy to be kind to, Grace." The simple compliment warmed her more than the fire. "I'll miss our conversations when I'm at the main house." "I'll still be around," Sam said. "Just not here. It won't be the same." Sam straightened, meeting her eyes directly. "No, it won't." That night, Grace lay awake long after Sam had retired to his bedroll on the floor. Tomorrow she would leave this cabin and the strange, intimate world they had created here. While part of her looked forward to proper accommodations and female company, another part mourned the end of this time alone with Sam. She had known him less than a week, yet he had saved her life, tended her wounds, shared his home and food, and shown her kindness when she most needed it. Somewhere amid the trauma and recovery, Grace realized, her feelings for Samuel Dawson had grown into something deeper than gratitude. But what did he feel? There had been moments, glances, almost touches, words that seemed to hover on the edge of something more. Yet he had maintained a respectful distance, never crossing the line into impropriety despite their unusual circumstances. In the morning, she would go to the Thornton ranch, and a more conventional path would open before her. Perhaps it was for the best. A woman alone in the West needed to be practical above all else. With that thought, Grace finally drifted into a fitful sleep, dreaming once more of gray eyes and gentle hands, of desert heat and the shadow of circling birds. The journey to the main ranch house the next day was made in a comfortable buggy driven by Sam himself. Grace sat beside him, acutely aware of his proximity, and the fact that this might be the last time they would be alone together. "It's beautiful country," she said, looking out at the landscape that had nearly claimed her life. In the safety of the buggy, with water and supplies and Sam beside her, she could appreciate its stark beauty, the red rocks rising dramatically against the blue sky, the surprisingly varied plant life that had adapted to this harsh environment. "It grows on you," Sam agreed. "Wasn't sure I'd stay when I first arrived. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." "I can understand why," Grace said, surprising herself with the sincerity of the statement. Despite everything, there was something compelling about this wild territory. As they approached the Double Cross, Grace could see why it was considered one of the premier ranches in the territory. The main house was a substantial two-story building of stone and timber, surrounded by well-maintained outbuildings, corrals, and bunkhouses. A creek ran alongside the property, explaining the unusually lush vegetation around the buildings. Mrs. Thornton met them at the door, welcoming Grace warmly and showing her to a comfortable bedroom on the second floor with its own small sitting area. "This was our daughter Caroline's room," she explained. "It's been empty too long." "I'm honored you would share it with me," Grace said, touched by the sentiment. "Dinner is at 6. Please make yourself at home until then. There are fresh clothes in the wardrobe, some of Caroline's things that should fit you well enough until we can arrange for new ones." Left alone, Grace explored the room that would be her temporary home. It was feminine without being fussy, with a bookshelf full of volumes that suggested Caroline Thornton had been an educated young woman with varied interests. The wardrobe held dresses of better quality than Grace had ever owned, even before the robbery. She selected a simple blue day dress that required minimal alteration to fit her slightly smaller frame and changed gratefully out of her borrowed clothes. As she brushed her hair before the mirror, Grace studied her reflection. The desert had left its mark. Her skin was still red in places, despite Sam's careful ministrations with salve, and she had lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. But her eyes were clear and bright in a way they hadn't been even before the stagecoach robbery. Something about facing death and surviving had changed her fundamentally. Or perhaps it wasn't just the survival, but who had helped her survive. At dinner, Grace was introduced to the ranch foreman and his wife, who lived in a smaller house nearby. The conversation was pleasant, focused on ranch business and local news. Sam was noticeably absent. "Mr. Dawson not joining us?" Grace asked, trying to sound merely curious. "Sam prefers his own company most evenings," Mr. Thornton explained. "Always has, even before we made him trail boss." "He's not unsociable," Mrs. Thornton added quickly. "Just quiet by nature." "Yes, I noticed that," Grace said with a small smile, "though he can be quite conversational once he's comfortable." The knowing look that passed between the Thorntons wasn't lost on Grace, but neither commented further on Sam. After dinner, Mr. Thornton raised the subject of Grace's future. "I've been thinking about your situation, Miss Harrington. If you still wish to reach Bentonville, we can arrange an escort and funds for your journey. But if you're open to other possibilities—" "George has been speaking with the town council in Copper Springs," Mrs. Thornton interjected. "They've been looking to hire a schoolteacher for some time. The position would come with a small house and a reasonable salary." "Copper Springs?" Grace asked, her pulse quickening. "That's not far from here, is it?" "Just 20 miles, Mr. Thornton confirmed. "Close enough that you wouldn't be isolated, far enough to be your own woman." The offer was tempting. More than tempting. It would allow her to pursue her profession without the uncertainty of traveling across country to Bentonville with no possessions or credentials, and it would mean staying near the double cross. Near Sam. "I would need references," Grace said, thinking practically. "All my papers were lost in the robbery." "I've already written to Boston inquiring after your credentials," Mr. Thornton said. "Hope you don't mind the liberty. Figure it'll take weeks for a reply, but in the meantime, the council is willing to take you on provisionally based on my recommendation." Grace was momentarily stunned by the effort he had made on her behalf. "That's incredibly generous, Mr. Thornton." "You survived an ordeal that would have broken many," he said simply. "Shows character, and Sam speaks highly of your education and intelligence. That's enough for me." Again, that knowing look between husband and wife. Grace wondered exactly what Sam had said about her. "May I have some time to consider?" she asked. "Of course," Mrs. Thornton assured her. "There's no rush. You're welcome here as long as you need." That night, in Caroline Thornton's comfortable bed, Grace found herself missing the small cabin where she had begun to heal and the man who had made it possible. The main house was lovely, but it wasn't where her heart wanted to be. She had always considered herself a practical woman. Teaching was a respectable profession for a single lady, one of the few that allowed independence. She had planned her move to Bentonville meticulously, saving for months to afford the journey and the necessary supplies. But life had a way of upending even the most careful plans. Perhaps there was a message in that sometimes the path forward wasn't the one you had mapped out, but the one that opened unexpectedly before you. Copper Springs. 20 miles from the Double Cross, near enough to see Sam regularly if he were so inclined. The thought made her both hopeful and fearful. What if she stayed and discovered she had misread his interest? What if the connection she felt had been merely the intensity of her rescue and recovery? Sleep eluded her as she turned these questions over in her mind. Outside, the vast Arizona night spread like a blanket of stars, so different from the closed-in cityscape of Boston. Despite everything, Grace felt a growing affection for this wild country. The next morning, she was surprised to see Sam riding into the yard as she sat on the porch with her breakfast. Her heart quickened at the sight of him, and she realized how much she had missed him in just one day. "Good morning, Miss Harrington," he called, tipping his hat as he dismounted. "You're looking well." "Thank you, Mr. Dawson," she replied, matching his formality, though it felt strange after the intimacy of their days together in the cabin. "What brings you to the main house so early?" "Business with Mr. Thornton," he said, then hesitated. "And I wanted to make sure you were settling in all right." "Very well, thank you. Mrs. Thornton has been most kind." An awkward silence fell between them, so different from the comfortable quiet they had shared in his cabin. "Mr. Thornton mentioned a teaching position in Copper Springs," Grace said finally. Something flickered in Sam's eyes, hope, perhaps. "It's a good town, growing, decent folks mostly. Would you think it a good place for me to settle?" Sam removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "I think any place would be better for having you in it," he said simply. The words hung in the air between them, more direct than anything he had said during their time together. Grace felt her cheeks warm. "Sam, Miss Harrington," Mr. Thornton's voice interrupted as he stepped onto the porch. "Good morning. I see Sam's found you." "Yes, sir," Sam said, replacing his hat. "Just checking that Miss Harrington is comfortable." "Indeed she is," Mr. Thornton replied with a smile. "Elizabeth is already talking about taking her to town for new clothes and supplies." "That's very generous," Grace said. "Nonsense. It's the least we can do. Now, Sam, shall we discuss that business with the North Pasture?" With a last look at Grace, Sam followed Mr. Thornton into the house, leaving her with her cooling coffee and confused thoughts. Mrs. Thornton found her there some time later, still gazing out at the ranch yard. "He's a good man," she said, settling into the chair beside Grace. "Who?" Grace asked, though she knew perfectly well. Mrs. Thornton's kind eyes crinkled with amusement. "Sam Dawson. One of the best men I know, in fact. Loyal, honest, hardworking, not much for social graces, but with a heart as big as all outdoors." "Yes, I've seen that," Grace said softly. "He's never shown much interest in settling down. Always said his work was enough, but the way he looks at you." Mrs. Thornton let the observation hang between them. "We've only known each other a week," Grace protested weakly. "Some things don't need time." "George asked me to marry him 3 weeks after we met. Been together 32 years now." Grace stared at the older woman. "Are you encouraging me to pursue Mr. Dawson?" Mrs. Thornton laughed. I'm encouraging you to follow your heart, whatever it tells you. But I will say this, I've never seen Sam ride out to check on a guest at the main house before. Not once in 8 years. With that, she rose and went back inside, leaving Grace with even more to consider. The week that followed settled into a pleasant routine. Grace regained her strength, helped Mrs. Thornton with household tasks, and began to learn about ranch life. She met more of the Hands and their families, finding herself particularly drawn to the children who indeed could benefit from proper schooling. Sam visited the main house every few days, usually on ranch business. Each time, he found a reason to speak with Grace, their conversations gradually regaining some of the ease they had known in the cabin. She learned more about his work as trail boss, his knowledge of the land and its creatures, his quiet dreams of someday having a small place of his own. 10 days after her arrival at the Double Cross, Mr. Thornton announced that the town council of Copper Springs had formally offered Grace the teaching position, contingent on verification of her credentials. "They'd like you to visit next week if you're feeling up to it," he said. "See the school, meet some of the families." "I'd like that very much," Grace said, her decision made. "I want to accept the position." That evening, she found herself alone on the porch with Sam after dinner, the first true privacy they'd had since she left his cabin. "Mr. Thornton says you'll be coming with us to Copper Springs next week," she said. "That's right. He wants me to handle some business with the cattle broker there." "I've decided to take the teaching position," Grace told him, watching his face carefully. Something like relief crossed his features. "I'm glad. It's a good opportunity. It means I'll be staying in Arizona territory. I know." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words between them. "When I was lying in the desert," Grace said finally, "waiting to die, I made a promise to myself. If by some miracle I survived, I would never again let fear stop me from speaking the truth of my heart." Sam turned to look at her, his gray eyes intense in the gathering dusk. "The truth of my heart," she continued, her voice steady despite her racing pulse, "is that I have come to care for you, Samuel Dawson. More than I should, perhaps, given how short our acquaintance has been. But nearly dying has a way of clarifying what matters most." Sam's hands tightened on the porch railing. "Grace, you don't have to say anything," she hurried on. "I know it may be unwelcome or too soon or simply not what you feel, but I made a promise and I had to keep it." Sam took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. "When I found you in the desert," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion, "something happened to me. I've spent my life keeping to myself, doing my job, not getting too close to anyone. But from the moment I carried you back to my cabin, nothing has been the same." Grace's heart soared at his words. "What are you saying, Sam?" "I'm saying I've never met anyone like you. Your strength, your kindness, your spirit. They wake something in me I didn't know was there." He took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. "I'm saying that the thought of you going to Bentonville nearly drove me crazy, and knowing you'll be in Copper Springs instead makes me happier than I have any right to be." "You have every right," Grace whispered, her eyes filling with tears of joy. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Sam leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Grace responded, her arms sliding around his neck as his encircled her waist. When they finally parted, both breathless, Sam rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the first day you were strong enough to sit up and argue with me about Dickens." Grace laughed, happiness bubbling up inside her. "I've wanted you to do it since then, too. I wasn't sure. It seemed wrong somehow when you were vulnerable and in my care." "That's because you are a good man, Samuel Dawson." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw, The best man I've ever known." He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I don't have much to offer a woman like you, Grace. Just myself and whatever future we might build together." "That's all I want," she said simply. "That's everything." They stood together on the porch, the vast Arizona sky spreading above them, stars emerging one by one in the deepening blue. From disaster and near death had come this unexpected gift, a love neither had been looking for but both had found. Grace thought of the buzzards that had circled above her, harbingers of death that had instead led to life. Sam had found her before they did, and in saving her, had saved a part of himself as well. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now," Sam said, taking her hand in his, "we start writing our own story." In the weeks that followed, Grace settled into her new life with surprising ease. Copper Springs proved to be a welcoming community eager for a proper teacher. The school was small but sound, and the house that came with the position, while humble, felt like a place she could make her own. Sam rode the 20 miles from the Double Cross every weekend, sometimes staying in town, sometimes taking Grace back to the ranch for visits with the Thorntons. Their courtship progressed steadily, each visit deepening their connection and confirming what they had both felt from the beginning, that what had brought them together was more than chance. When word finally came from Boston confirming Grace's credentials and good character, the town council made her position permanent. That same day, Sam asked her to marry him. "It might seem fast to some," he said as they walked along the creek behind her small house, "but when you've faced death and found life instead, time takes on a different meaning." "Yes," Grace said simply, her heart too full for more elaborate words. They were married in the Copper Springs church the following month, with the Thorntons standing as witnesses and the whole town turning out to celebrate their new teacher and the respected trail boss from the Double Cross. As a wedding gift, Mr. Thornton offered Sam the position of ranch manager with a house of their own on Double Cross land close enough to Copper Springs that Grace could still teach, yet allowing Sam to take on more responsibilities at the ranch he loved. "I've been looking to step back a bit," Mr. Thornton explained. "Elizabeth wants to travel east to see her sister, and truthfully, my joints aren't what they used to be. You're the only man I'd trust to run this place the way it should be run, Sam." "I don't know what to say, sir," Sam replied, genuinely moved. "Say yes, you fool," Mrs. Thornton said with affectionate exasperation. "It's what you both want, isn't it?" And so it was that Grace found herself mistress of a snug ranch house at the Double Cross, riding into town 3 days a week to teach and spending the rest of her time learning the ways of ranch life. The desert that had nearly claimed her life became her home, its harsh beauty a daily reminder of how precious life could be. A year to the day after Sam found her dying in the desert, Grace placed their newborn son in his arms for the first time. They named him Thomas, after Sam's father, with George as his middle name in honor of the man who had helped make their happiness possible. "He's perfect," Sam whispered, awestruck by the tiny life they had created. "He is," Grace agreed, watching her husband cradle their child with such gentle care. "Our little miracle." As the Arizona sun set beyond their window, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Grace thought of how far she had come from that terrible day when death had seemed certain. The buzzards had circled, patient and expectant, but they had been denied their prey. Instead, she had found life in its fullest measure: love, purpose, family, home. The desert that had nearly killed her had given her everything she had never known she wanted. Sam looked up from their son's face to meet her eyes, and the love she saw there was answer enough to any question life might pose. They had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, and in doing so, had found themselves as well. Outside, the vast Arizona sky darkened to indigo, stars appearing one by one like promises kept. Inside, a family that began with rescue and revelation embraced their future together, grateful for second chances and the unexpected paths that lead to home. Years passed, and the double cross prospered under Sam's management. Grace continued teaching until their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, arrived 2 years after Thomas. She then focused on creating a small school at the ranch itself, teaching not only her own children but those of the ranch hands as well. When Mr. Thornton passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 75, he left the double cross to Sam and Grace, with provisions for Mrs. Thornton's comfort for the remainder of her days. The transition was seamless, as Sam had effectively been running the ranch for years by then. "He thought of you as the son he never had," Mrs. Thornton told Sam at the reading of the will. "And Grace, my dear, you brought light back into our lives after Caroline's death. This is exactly as it should be." The Dawson family grew to include a third child, another boy they named Samuel Jr., who arrived when Thomas was 8 and Elizabeth was 6. The 3 children thrived in the freedom of ranch life, learning the value of hard work and the beauty of the land that was their heritage. Grace never forgot her ordeal in the desert. But as time softened the memory, she came to see it as the pivotal moment that had led her to true happiness. Sometimes, on clear nights, she and Sam would sit on the porch of their home, looking up at the same stars that had witnessed both her near death and her rescue. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't seen those buzzards that day?" she asked Sam on one such evening, their hands intertwined as they had been for over a decade. "I try not to," he admitted. "The thought of never finding you." He shook his head, unable to complete the sentence. "I believe some things are meant to be," Grace said softly. "Not that the robbery was meant to happen or that I was meant to suffer, but that somehow we were meant to find each other." "I never believed in fate before you," Sam said, raising her hand to his lips. "But I can't think of any other explanation for how a Boston schoolteacher and an Arizona cowboy could have found such happiness together." Inside the house, their children slept soundly, their dreams filled with tomorrow's adventures. Outside, the desert stretched away in all directions, beautiful and dangerous and ultimately generous to those who respected its power. Grace leaned her head against Sam's shoulder, grateful beyond words for the life they had built together, a life that had almost ended before it began, under the merciless sun and the watchful eyes of circling buzzards. But Sam had found her in time, and in saving her life, had given her a love story greater than any she could have imagined. And that, Grace thought as she gazed up at the vast Arizona sky, was the greatest miracle of all.